The farming industry in the United States faced a big challenge after President Donald Trump announced new immigration policies and economic changes. One of the most important changes was the introduction of tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods. These new rules were meant to help American businesses, especially in manufacturing, but they ended up hurting American farmers. The farming industry depends heavily on exporting crops to other countries, so when other countries responded to the US tariffs by placing their own tariffs on American goods, farmers across the country started to feel the impact. And now, John Deere has taken a shocking step by shutting down major parts of its production in the US. One of the first signs of trouble came from John Deere. The CEO of John Deere, John May, warned investors that the farming sector was in a difficult position. In 2025, John Deere announced it might have to increase its prices by 200%. This was not confirmed yet, but it showed how serious the problem had become. When prices for farm equipment rise that much, many farmers can no longer afford to buy new machinery. Instead, they have to continue using old equipment, which can break down more often and cost more to maintain. The tariffs were not only applied to steel and aluminum, which affected the cost of making farming equipment, but also led to a trade war. Countries like China, Mexico, Canada, and the European Union responded to the US tariffs by placing their own tariffs on American crops such as soybeans, corn, pork, and dairy. For example, before the tariffs, China bought over 60% of all American soybean exports. But after the tariffs, Chinese buyers turned to Brazil and Argentina instead. This change caused American soybean exports to China to drop by more than 70% in just 1 year. The loss of export markets led to a big fall in prices. For example, the price of soybeans dropped from around $10.5 per bushel in 2017 to below $8.5 per bushel in 2019. Corn prices also fell from about $3.7 per bushel to $3.3 in the same period. These lower prices meant that many farmers were selling their crops for less than it cost to grow them. That is a dangerous situation for any business, but especially for farmers who already face high costs and many risks like bad weather and pests. Farming is not a business where changes can be made quickly. Farmers plan their work months in advance, and they cannot suddenly switch to another crop or business. A large farm in Iowa, for example, might plant over 2,000 acres of corn and soybeans each year. The cost to plant 1 acre of corn can be more than $700. That includes seeds, fertilizer, fuel, labor, and equipment. So planting 2,000 acres means spending more than $1.4 million before even harvesting the crop. If prices fall too low, farmers can lose money fast. Because of the falling prices and export problems, many farmers began to delay burning new equipment. John Deere and other companies that sell farm machinery saw their sales go down. In 2018 and 2019, John Deere's net income fell by over 10%. Farmers who would normally buy a new tractor every few years started to keep their old ones for longer. This also affected local dealerships and repair shops. When fewer tractors are sold, fewer parts are needed, and fewer mechanics are hired. It becomes a chain reaction across the whole farm economy. Another big issue was the labor shortage. American farms depend heavily on seasonal workers, many of whom come from other countries. Changes in immigration policy made it harder for these workers to come to the US, and this led to crops not being picked in time. In California, for example, some farmers reported losing up to 20% of their fruit and vegetable crops in 2019 because they did not have enough workers. Losing 20% of a crop can mean losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. The long-term effects of the tariffs were also serious. Other countries began to build new supply chains. Once a buyer in China switches from American soybeans to Brazilian ones, they might not come back, even if tariffs are removed later. Trade relationships take years to build, but can be lost in a few months. This is what happened in many cases. For example, in 2017, the US exported nearly 33 million tons of soybeans to China. By 2019, that number had dropped to just 13 million tons. Meanwhile, Brazil's soybean exports to China rose to over 70 million tons. Farming cooperatives also began to break apart. These co-ops allow small farmers to share resources like tractors, storage, and delivery systems. But when exports dropped, many members left. This meant fewer people were paying to keep the co-op running, and in some areas, co-ops that had been helping farmers for more than 50 years shut down. That left farmers to handle costs alone, which was often too much. The tech side of farming also got hit. New tools like farm drones, soil sensors, and smart apps were helping farmers improve crop yield. But as farm income dropped, fewer farmers could afford to use these tools. Companies making this technology saw a fall in sales. Some had to stop pilot programs, and many small startups lost investors. This slowed down the growth of digital farming in the US, while countries like Brazil and Australia kept moving ahead with modern methods. Schools and colleges that trained people for farming jobs also felt the pressure. These schools depend on partnerships with local farms and companies, and as budgets got tight, many of these programs were reduced or shut down. Between 2018 and 2020, some agricultural programs in community colleges saw up to a 30% drop in enrollment. This means fewer trained workers are entering the farming sector now. International buyers started looking elsewhere. Countries like China began importing soybeans and corn from Brazil and Argentina instead of the US. In 2018, Brazil's soybean exports to China increased by more than 20%, while US exports dropped sharply. Once these new trade paths were built, it became hard for the US to join those markets. This long-term shift could cost American farmers billions of dollars over time. Inside the country, different areas were affected differently. For example, states like Iowa and Illinois, which grow a lot of soybeans, lost more money than other states. China's tariffs were focused directly on soybeans. In 2017, China brought about 60% of all US soybeans exports. After the tariffs, that number dropped to near zero for a period. Cotton farmers in Texas and dairy producers in Wisconsin also lost key markets. These losses increased stress in rural communities and led to more farm bankruptcies. In 2019 alone, over 550 family farms filed for bankruptcy. Equipment makers like John Deere were also hurt. The company saw fewer orders from American farmers. With fewer machines being sold, the company had to delay some product launches and limit research spending. At the same time, the cost of making equipment went up because of tariffs on steel and aluminum. John Deere's profits fell by nearly 15% in 1 year. The company managed to avoid big layoffs, but it had to cut back on many future plans. Another big problem was with the supply chain for farm inputs. As always, don't hesitate to comment down your thoughts on this situation, and while you're down there, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more upcoming uploads.